Jeans feel timeless, but for most of history, nobody wore them. So what did people wear before denim took over? You probably do not think about jeans as an invention. You just pull them on. They are there for school, work, shopping, travel, first dates, lazy Sundays, and the kind of errands where you do not want to look dressed up, but you also do not want to look like you gave up. Jeans feel neutral. They feel normal. They feel like they have always been part of everyday life. But they have not. For most of human history, nobody owned jeans. Nobody wore denim pants to grab food, fix a fence, walk through a city, or sit in a classroom. The world before jeans was stranger, stricter, and much less comfortable. What you wore on your legs could tell people your job, your money, your class, your gender, and even whether you were expected to work with your hands or stay clean enough to be seen as respectable. If you like strange stories behind the clothes people wear every day, subscribe now, because the history of jeans begins in a world where pants were not just pants. They were a social signal. Before denim took over, clothing was not universal in the way it is now. Today, jeans can be worn by a student, a mechanic, a model, a farmer, a billionaire, or someone half asleep in an airport. That kind of flexibility would have seemed unusual in earlier centuries. In Europe and North America, men often wore breeches, trousers, stockings, linen drawers, wool garments, or work pants depending on the period and their place in society. Breeches were short pants that stopped around the knee, usually worn with stockings. They could look elegant on wealthy men, but they were not exactly built for the modern idea of comfort. Trousers became more common later, especially among workers and sailors, because they covered the whole leg and made more sense for movement. Fabric mattered too. Wool was common because it was warm and durable, but it could be heavy, itchy, and miserable in heat. Linen was lighter and easier against the skin, but it wore out faster under hard labor. Leather could protect the body, but it was expensive, stiff, and not something most people wanted to wear all day unless the job demanded it. And then there was the simple problem of money. Clothing used to be much more valuable than we imagine today. A pair of pants was not something you casually replaced because the knee ripped. People patched garments, handed them down, remade them, and wore them until the fabric was almost gone. So before jeans, most people did not have one perfect everyday garment. They had whatever their work, status, climate, and wallet allowed. And that meant the clothes on your legs were constantly telling the world where you stood. Long before denim gave millions of people something tougher to reach for. In the world before jeans, clothing had rules. Some were written down. Many were just understood. If you were wealthy, your clothes were supposed to show it. Better fabric, cleaner lines, careful tailoring, brighter dyes, and garments that proved you did not spend your whole day crawling through dirt, smoke, or mud. A rich man could wear fine wool breeches, polished shoes, and stockings because his clothes did not have to survive a mine shaft or a factory floor. If you were poor, your clothes had a different job. They had to last. That is why working people cared less about elegance and more about survival. Farmers, sailors, laborers, blacksmiths, builders, and dock workers needed clothing that could take punishment. Their pants had to handle bending, lifting, sweat, weather, tools, and constant friction. But the materials they had were not always ideal. Wool trousers were strong, but they could be hot, scratchy, and slow to dry. Linen was cooler, but it could break down under rough use. Canvas and other heavy cotton fabrics were tougher, but they were stiff and not always comfortable at first. If you worked outdoors, the wrong pants could become a daily problem. Think about wearing heavy wool while carrying tools in summer, or trying to climb, squat, and lift in trousers that were cut more for respectability than movement. Would you last a week before begging for something easier? This is one reason the history of pants is really the history of work. Clothes had to follow the body. When work changed, clothing had to change with it. Sailors helped push long trousers into wider use because full-length pants made sense at sea. They protected the legs better and allowed more movement than knee breeches and stockings. Workers in growing cities also needed practical clothing as factories, railroads, docks, and construction sites expanded. The old clothing rules started to crack because the modern world was becoming dirtier, faster, and more physical. But status still mattered. Clean, fitted clothing suggested respectability. Rough clothing suggested labor. Patched clothing suggested poverty. The line between work clothes and proper clothes was much stronger than it is now. That is what makes jeans so important later. They did not simply replace one type of pants. They helped blur the line between hard labor and everyday life. But before that could happen, the working world needed something tougher than ordinary trousers, and the demand was about to explode in one of the roughest environments imaginable. By the 1800s, the world was changing fast. Cities were growing. Railroads were spreading. Factories were filling with workers. Mines were pulling men underground for long, dangerous shifts. Farms were expanding. Ports were moving goods in huge quantities. Clothing had to keep up with bodies that were working harder, longer, and in rougher conditions. This is where ordinary trousers began to fail. A miner did not need pants that looked polite in a drawing room. He needed pants that could survive rock, dust, tools, sweat, and constant bending. A railroad worker needed fabric that would not tear after a few brutal days. A ranch hand needed something that could handle riding, lifting dirt, weather, and long hours outside. Before jeans became the answer, workers used whatever tough clothing they could get. Some wore canvas trousers. Some wore duckcloth, a heavy cotton fabric used for workwear and sails. Some wore overalls because they protected more of the body and were useful for dirty jobs. Others wore patched wool or cotton trousers until the fabric gave out completely. These clothes were practical, but they were not perfect. Heavy canvas could be stiff. Wool could trap heat. Cheap fabric could split. Pockets could tear away when filled with tools or ore. Seams could burst at the worst possible moment. And when you worked for little money, a ruined pair of pants was not just annoying, it was expensive. That detail matters because jeans were born from failure points. Not fashion, not style. Failure points. The early story of jeans belongs to the American West in the 1800s, especially the world shaped by the gold rush, mining camps, railroad expansion, and hard manual labor. Men were chasing gold, building towns, hauling supplies, and working in places where clothing was treated almost like equipment. San Francisco became a key place in this story. During the gold rush era, it was full of miners, merchants, laborers, and people trying to make money from the chaos. One of those merchants was Levi Strauss, a German-born businessman who moved to San Francisco and sold dry goods. That meant fabric, clothing, bedding, and supplies, the kinds of things people needed in a fast-growing frontier economy. But Strauss alone did not invent jeans as we understand them. The other key figure was Jacob Davis, a tailor in Nevada. Davis made work pants for laborers, and he kept running into the same problem. The pants tore where workers put the most stress on them, especially around the pockets. His solution was small, but it changed clothing history. He reinforced the weak points with metal rivets, the little metal fasteners you can still see on many jeans today. A tiny piece of metal turned work pants into something much stronger. And once that idea existed, the story of jeans could really begin. Jacob Davis had the idea, but he did not have the money to protect it. In the 1870s, if you wanted to secure an invention, you needed a patent. Davis knew his riveted work pants were useful, and he knew other people could copy them. So he wrote to Levi Strauss, the merchant who had supplied him with fabric, and asked him to help pay for the patent. That partnership changed the future of clothing. On May 20th, 1873, Jacob Davis and Levi Strauss received U.S. patent number 139,121 for an improvement in fastening pocket openings. That sounds dry, but the idea was simple. Put metal rivets at the weak points of work pants so they would not tear as easily. The pockets, the base of the fly, the places where hard labor destroyed fabric first. Those rivets are one of the reasons jeans became jeans. At first, they were not called jeans in the way most people use the word today. They were work pants, waist overalls, sturdy trousers made for miners, laborers, farmers, railroad workers, and men who needed clothing that could take punishment. The fabric was often denim, a tough cotton twill, usually dyed blue with indigo. That blue color was useful because it helped hide dirt and wear better than lighter fabrics. The original customers were not trying to look cool. They were trying to get through the day without their pants falling apart. That is what makes the birth of jeans so different from many fashion stories. They were not created for luxury. They were not created for a royal court, a runway, or a rich neighborhood. They were created for people doing hard, physical work in a rough economy. And yet, that working class origin became part of their power. Jeans carried the image of toughness. They belonged to miners, ranchers, railroad workers, cowboys, and builders. They looked honest, physical, and practical. Over time, that image became attractive even to people who had never set foot in a mine or ridden across open land. But before jeans could become fashion, they had to spread as workwear. Levi Strauss and Company grew by selling durable clothing to the people building and digging through the American West. The pants were reinforced, washable, repairable, and easier to trust than many older work garments. That is why jeans won the first battle. They solved a real problem. But the stranger battle came later, when a garment made for laborers started climbing out of mines, farms, and workshops and into movies, schools, music, and everyday closets. The pants that once marked someone as a worker were about to become a symbol almost anyone could claim. For decades, jeans still belonged mostly to work. They were worn by miners, ranchers, farmers, railroad workers, factory workers, and people who needed clothes that could survive the day. They were not polite clothing. They were not office clothing. They were not something most people wore to look respectable. That began to change in the 20th century. Hollywood helped turn jeans into a symbol. Western movies made denim look rugged, independent, and American. Cowboys on screen wore jeans as if they belonged to freedom itself. Later, actors like Marlon Brando and James Dean helped connect jeans with youth and rebellion. A pair of denim pants could suddenly say that you were not interested in dressing like your parents. Some schools and public places even banned jeans because they were seen as too rough, too rebellious, or too closely tied to teenage trouble. That only made them more powerful. When adults tell young people not to wear something, the clothing often gets more interesting. By the 1960s and 1970s, jeans had moved far beyond workwear. Students wore them. Protesters wore them. Musicians wore them. Hippies embroidered them, patched them, painted them, and turned them into personal statements. What began as practical clothing for labor became a blank surface for identity. That is the strange answer to the question of what people wore before jeans. They wore breeches, stockings, wool trousers, linen pants, canvas workwear, overalls, uniforms, patched garments, and whatever their class, job, region, and money allowed. But none of those garments did exactly what jeans eventually did. Jeans became tough enough for work, casual enough for daily life, cheap enough for ordinary people, and symbolic enough for culture. They blurred lines that used to be much stronger: worker and student, rebel and consumer, poor and fashionable, practical and stylish. And now, they are so normal that we barely see them. The next time you pull on a pair of jeans, look at the rivets, the seams, the pockets, the faded blue fabric. Those details are not random. They carry the story of miners, tailors, merchants, factories, cowboys, movie stars, teenagers, and millions of people who wanted clothing that could survive real life. Before jeans, pants often told the world exactly where you belonged. After jeans, one garment could belong almost anywhere. If you enjoyed this weird clothing history, subscribe for more stories behind the things we wear every day. And tell me in the comments what clothing item should come next. Sneakers, hoodies, suits, dresses, or something sitting in your closet right now.